Hello, I'm Jane Kelly, the Digital Archivist at the Harvard Divinity School Library, and I'm happy to be joining you for DigiPres 2025. Today, I'll be talking about how I moved from overwhelm to action in order to make progress on providing access to a large post-custodial collection. By shifting my mindset from what I can't do to what I can do, I was able to make incremental, measurable progress on what previously seemed like an insurmountable project. First, I'll share a little bit about my institutional context, which is rife with uncertainty and change from top to bottom, as is the case for so many of us right now. And sometimes this change can be framed as opportunity, but I know that in many cases we experience uncertainty as added stress. I work at Harvard Divinity School at Harvard University in the Harvard Divinity School Library. Now, within the library, I'm situated in the collection services unit, where we're in the middle of a 2-year pause on collecting as we reevaluate how we approach our work, what our priorities are, and what is sustainable. After I joined the collection services group as the library's first ever digital archivist about 2.5 years ago, we formed an archives team. With more staff collaborating on archival work, we're looking at an intimidating backlog as we re-envision how we approach this work. And then there's me, taking on a new role for the library, where I'm the sole staff member responsible for all things born digital, from acquisition to access to preservation. Next, let me cue up the collection that got me thinking about how a change in perspective can change the trajectory of a project. This post-custodial collection consists of about 550 gigabytes of digital images of at-risk material related to the Hungarian Unitarian Church in Transylvania, Romania, as well as PDF copies and scans of related secondary material. Now, a hard drive with the images was transferred to the library in 2021, but there's no accompanying metadata or documentation. Now, a very detailed memorandum of understanding, an MOU, between the Hungarian Unitarian Church and the library was signed, but there is not a great deal of clarity on who is going to do all of the work described in that agreement. Now, you can probably see from the images on the slides here, one of the primary challenges of this collection are that there are many languages represented. You'll also see that there are manuscripts, books, and other archival material, and the folder titles of the images on the hard drive are in Hungarian. Now, another challenge was that by the time I was hired as the digital archivist and began to tackle this collection, several years had passed since the initial donation. We weren't in regular contact with the donor or other partners and didn't receive documentation or metadata at the time of transfer. This has made it challenging to understand the organization of the material, where the original content is from, and in some cases, why certain material was photographed at all. Now, there's a lot of uncertainty swirling around these collection-specific challenges. The first of which is budget and funding. So I've had to consider what I can accomplish that doesn't require additional funds, including digital storage. So if spending has to remain flat or even decrease, can we afford to put this in our preservation repository? What's possible? Next is strategic planning. So as we await the results of a strategic planning process at a higher level at the Divinity School, what's a priority? How do I situate myself and my work in this environment? And lastly, priorities. Given our current environment of budgetary strain, uncertainty, reevaluation of our work, how are our priorities changing and how does that affect me? Focusing on the uncertainty, I think, can really cultivate a mindset of what I can't do. And that list is a long one. In my experience, it's easy to go down this path of listing everything that isn't possible in the current environment, and it can be difficult to claw your way back out of that. So for me, focusing on uncertainty and what isn't possible can lead to inaction and a sense that there's nothing to be done and nothing that can be accomplished. So what do we do? How do we shake this off and find a way to move forward? One thing that I've been able to do is invert the question. Instead of asking what is uncertain, let's ask what is certain, what is known. Instead of focusing on what we can't do, let's focus on what we can do and what is possible. So, what is certain? What do I feel confident that I know and can plan for? So I know this collection will be preserved. We're not getting rid of it. I need to ensure that nothing is lost, and based on my role within the library, I know that that is my responsibility. We're not deaccessioning it. I can't pretend it doesn't exist. The goal is to provide access. I also know that there's loads of internal support for new approaches. Leadership wants and needs us to do things differently than we have in the past. There's a safe space here in my context to try new things out, and there's explicit buy-in from leadership about experimenting and working iteratively. Taking an iterative approach has really been helpful for me in relieving some of the pressure that I put on myself by giving me permission to inch forward without knowing all the answers. I can always take a step back, revise, change, adjust as I learn more from colleagues and in other research, and then move forward again. And I'll talk about this more in a moment, but I also experimented with new and different tools to try to provide better access. And again, internal support from leadership and also my colleagues, my peers, allowed me to feel confident trying something new. And finally, something I can count on is my own and my colleagues' professional judgment. I have a strong foundation of professional ethics, knowledge, and experience. I don't know everything about what may happen in the future, but I can trust myself to make smart decisions in this moment with the information I have. With the shift of what is uncertain to what is certain, I moved from the can't do to the can do. So what can I do? I can do many of the things we already do in working with collections. I can consult with colleagues, talk to my coworkers about what I'm trying to accomplish. I can do my research. As I mentioned previously, coworkers in my unit provided me with information they found in the course of their own work, but I also relied on the work I would do with any archival collection, background research to help me understand context. I read about the history of Unitarianism and anti-Trinitarianism in Hungary and Romania, the impact of communism on the Hungarian Unitarian Church, and everything that I could find about the archival and manuscript collections of the Hungarian Unitarian Church. I also, as I mentioned, took an iterative approach. I strategized and experimented with extensible processing approaches, and I drew on archival literature to inform how I might make some progress. So I'm not making these decisions in a vacuum. I have a breadth and depth of outside research and support that I can draw on. As I mentioned, I use new tools and technologies, in this case, ChatGPT for translation, which helped to fill some gaps in my own knowledge. I can create local backups. This has cost my time, but not any money out of the budget, which has been a question and a concern throughout this project. And I can finally also be transparent, both in notes I create for the finding aid and in any communication I have with colleagues and researchers about the current state of this collection. So there are no secrets here. I'll shift now to outlining the specific milestones I've hit, the things I can measure and share to show the progress I've made. And to a certain degree, this is just crossing things off the what I can do list. So I created local backups. I have a logical copy of the files on my secondary workstation, a second copy of the images, not the scans and PDFs, but images of the primary material on an external hard drive, and a near complete backup on SharePoint. So even if I haven't deposited this collection in our preservation repository, I can still take steps to stabilize and secure the material in a better than it was state. I also collaborated with staff within and outside my unit, gathering institutional knowledge and history, tapping colleagues in other Harvard Library units for their language and translation assistance, and rare book expertise from our unit's curator of historical collections. I experimented with ChatGPT for translation work and minimal descriptive and processing approaches, and I created and published description. So the collection now has a finding aid and a MARC record, so it's findable in our library discovery systems. And next, I want to dive just a little bit deeper into my use of ChatGPT for translation in context. Now, I initially tried to use Google Translate to help make sense of the information in the directory list. I quickly found that this wasn't helpful and decided to try using ChatGPT. Now, in a recent presentation at the Society of American Archivists conference this summer, Betts Koop from here at Harvard encourages us to privilege access, asking what can AI do to improve access and discoverability? And in this case, translation work that I would not otherwise have the resources to do. She makes the point that AI can be beneficial to help with work we otherwise would have to sacrifice. And to be honest, without the use of a tool like ChatGPT, I would have just been pretty stuck. So when Google Translate wasn't effective, I found that ChatGPT completely turned the tide on my understanding of the collection. So providing contextual information about what I was attempting to translate ended up giving me great insight into what I was working with. And I was able to, with this additional information provided by ChatGPT, go back to the original material and see that that information was indeed helpful and could allow me to provide better access to and notes about the collection. I also decided to try using the hard drive's directory list to create a finding aid in archive space. So a directory printout that I generated using a Python script could be turned into an archival object import spreadsheet and then form the bulk of the public finding aid. The original organization of the material and folder titles created by the donor do in many cases provide meaningful information about the contents if you can read Hungarian. At first, I really focused on collection level description to supplement this directory list, knowing that that might be the best I could do. And with time, and frankly, the translation assistance in ChatGPT, I was able to provide robust series level description as well. I hadn't previously uploaded a directory list as a finding aid in this way, but I find that in this case, it actually works. So here again, I'm taking a something is better than nothing approach, knowing that this might not be its final state, but that this is an improvement over the total lack of access in the past. So what work remains? I'll be the first to admit that this collection is not in its final permanent state, and there's a lot to be done. First is outreach to promote the collection. There's now this public description, but we haven't yet done the work to let the research community know that this exists. There's a need for a lot of further appraisal to identify the material that we don't need to retain and that we certainly don't need to deposit in our digital preservation system. There's also a need for improved description. As I mentioned, what I have now in the finding aid is just the information as provided in the directory list. So I really just have the folder titles. And of course, those folder titles don't represent the titles of the items, especially for printed material that would have a formal title. I also need to eventually, after further appraising the material, deposit this content in preservation storage. And in the long term, I hope to provide unmediated access to the digital material. So now researchers have to reach out and ask for what they want, which is contingent on them being able to identify that, and then wait for me specifically to send them a copy of the files. Now, to wrap up, I just want to say that in a time of limited resources, I think we can really reorient ourselves from a mentality of what I can't do and what's not possible to what I can do. What do I already know, and how can I apply it to this particular situation? Give yourself permission to make small strides, thinking about better practice rather than just best practice, which sometimes is just too much pressure and too high of an expectation to meet. Now, what we're used to doing isn't always possible anymore, and that's definitely the case with this particular collection. In the past, I would have envisioned, item level description of digitized published content, folder level description of archival material, direct unmediated access to the user through Harvard Library's access systems. And when that didn't seem feasible, it didn't feel like there was anything I could do with this collection. But I learned along the way that by taking these small and incremental steps forward, that there was a lot more that I could do for our users besides wait for the best possible outcome to become possible. And so I hope that this is helpful for all of us who are having to readjust to new expectations and constraints. And I look forward to speaking to you about how this can help in your repositories.